motion that this, as developed country, this house will fund African climate adaptation. We know that the climate adaptation are happening all around the world. The problem arises through climate adaptation. For example, the temperature is rising very quickly. There's a form of extreme climate leading towards how we are not able to predict climate changes, and also how extreme disasters are happening all around the world. In how is this bad? We believe that it is creating problems towards human itself, whether it leads towards starvation, on how the changes of daily routines, and also how it, at the end of the day, would also lead towards death. Now we are standing here talking more focused towards how Africa, as one of the continents that exists in the most dangerous position about climate adaptation. Why? Because we know that the condition of Africa, most of the people, most of the countries are actually underdeveloped, and to countermeasure this kind of climate adaptation, they are failing. And so we are proposing this motion that this House, as developed country, should fund African climate adaptation. Now we, government team, are going to prove to you why developed countries should actively fund African to countermeasure climate adaptation in Africa, and show how it will be beneficial for both of the sides. And second of all, we ask for the negative team to prove to us other methods without relying on from other funds from other countries, and they have to show its effectiveness. Now we define how it is, how this debate will be good, or how it will be good, is by showing that how these African countries at the end of the day can show how it is progressing in order to save the climate changes or climate adaptation in each of Africa's country. Now, first of all, we're going to debate about why is it urgent. Before that, NPOR. No. First of all, why is this urgent? We believe that climate adaptation is really dangerous, and how it is dangerous because it creates many changes in form of temperature. For example, when you're talking about temperature, even an increase of 1 degree will change your life forever. Like for example, usually we are active going outside. Now because the temperature is too hot, people tend to do other things. They prefer to stay at home, it making things not productive. Second of all, it also changes of form the climate that makes farmers hard to cultivate their farms, because they are hardly to predict when the water will come, when the rain will come, and thus leading towards how the farming cultivation to not be able to be cultivated well, and also the quality of each farming condition. Third of all is how the health issues that will come towards each society, for example, dehydration, and also how it will lead towards too hot, to making them dead at the end of the day. We believe that unlike Africa, Asian, Europe, America, and Australia have the capability to countermeasure this kind of problem. Even if they are just developing, they are currently able to countermeasure in a form of step by step. Like example, protecting the forest, and where other countries are doing more extreme measurement to counter this climate adaptation, Africa is failing. Why? Because yes.
What's the parameter one country can able to fix their own problem without any help?
Thank you. The definition of parameter of being able to help themselves is, for example, we can see how there are not many problems towards death, or also how the countries are actually still able to survive environmental damages, unlike beside disaster. That is what we call as the parameter. Now it goes back to why Africa cannot be suitable towards climate adaptation is, first of all, we believe that many of these countries are undeveloped. Only South Africa and Egypt are developing. What about the others? They cannot fend themselves. They are very poor, or even having so many problems inside their own country, making themselves unable to even predict or even fund themselves to be able to adapt to the climate adaptation. Thus, the government have no concern in helping themselves to solve the climate adaptation problems, because inside their own countries, many problems such as political economics are already very hard, and thus we see that this is urgent to be done as soon as possible. Why should it go as soon as possible? Because how people in Africa, most of them are being famine, because starvation are existing, how food logistics are not distributed well, because they cannot produce themselves, need a lot of urgent help. And thus, one of the most methods in surviving of these things are solving climate adaptation in Africa. And thus, we need a fast response. And who can give fast response? Those are the developed countries. Now, before we go further towards the developed countries, we're going to go towards the second area, but why the status quo is not enough. We know that in the status quo, government concerns are really low. They're focusing on fulfilling their primary needs are already very hard. Getting clothes for each of the family is already hard. Many of the children and people are very famine, and thus they are not able to put their money for environmental purposes. What about others non-NGO countries or NGO things? We believe that the NGO are concerned towards international issues towards Africa also, but does their fund enough to help Africa holistically? We believe no. And thus we believe that even through the concern of the status quo given by the government nor the NGO association, this environmental adaptation still is beyond help. And thus we believe something greater needs to exist, that is the developed countries in actively funding these countries. Now, why does the developed countries should actively contribute? First of all, we know the nature of developed countries they are economic stable, meaning that they are very stable in making their economic condition, having more money for financially something that is for financially helping other sectors. For example, they have money for army, they have money for research, and they have a lot of money for helping environmental changes. And thus, the ability of economy that is there for each developed countries is the way and the only way to help the African people. Because through a massive form of funding, the changes will be great, and thus the progress of climate adaptation will also be significant. Now, why must they help in the first place? Even if they have a lot of money, why should they put their money towards other countries that's not beneficial to them? Who say so? First of all, under the idea of responsibility, we believe that most of developed countries are the one contributing the most emission towards the changes that exist in climate changes. And thus, through this method, we believe that a form of payback should also be given by these developed countries in exchange of their developed economy, that is helping the other countries of environment. Second of all is about the international environmental needs. We believe that since developed and developing countries have so little place for environmental progress, we believe that in investing in Africa for environmental things is really needed, and thus we believe under this idea we are still proposing this motion. Thank you.